Namaskar, hello and a very warm welcome viewers. You're watching the special presentation of Sansad TV, Samvaad, with your host Kriti Mishra. And joining us today on the program is a very special guest, Union Civil Aviation Minister, Mr. Jyotiraditya. Sir, welcome to Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Kriti.
So let's begin talking about Gati Shakti. You wrote an erudite piece, Gati Shakti, a major leap in governance. Tell us, how will it mark a paradigm shift in our country's governance?
Well, if you look at the way the Prime Minister has been laying an huge amount of attention and detailing out, the very fact that we have to look at the country as one unit. And therefore, if we have to achieve our objective of Antyodaya, our objective of Sarvangniya Vikas, all-round development, then we have to look at things holistically. And if you look at his repertoire over the last 7 years, where from one nation, one market, one nation, one ration card, one nation, one sun, one grid, the solar alliance, the ration card perspective, the conjoining of markets perspective, this is another page out of that repertoire of ensuring that there is consolidation, there is focused development, focused projects that are put in place. And through the Gati Shakti project, and I'd like to just break it down into very simplistic thought processes, there is multimodal development on logistic projects across our country. But departments have a habit of operating in silos. The Prime Minister's objective is to make sure that departments work in unison, they talk to each other, and they develop their projects along a certain infrastructure corridor. So, case in point for you. For example, if a highway is being built across a certain sector, if that land acquisition is done of slightly more land, then a rail corridor can work alongside it as well. For example, the DMIDC corridor. In many urban and rural areas, roads are dug up to be relaid. Then the thought comes to mind of laying sewage lines. Post that, the thought comes to mind of laying electrical lines. Post that, the thought comes to mind of laying OFC lines. Why can we not do this as a holistic project? And therefore, the Gati Shakti mission is a mission to ensure that all-round infrastructural development happens in one go across the length and breadth of that particular stretch in India. It's also his imperative to ensure that when you look at development of infrastructure, there is a whole of government approach as opposed to a pieces of government approach. And therefore, this Gati Shakti initiative is one that is going to help all line ministries. For example, there are close to about 200 GIS, 200 levels of GIS maps that have been laid out together. And therefore, if you're a petroleum and natural gas ministry, as opposed to a national highways ministry or ministry of civil aviation, all of you are able to take advantage of that infrastructure pipe, if you will, to be able to roll out your projects. And therefore, a whole of government approach, an approach to work in unison, and an approach to do projects at one time as opposed to doing it in a piecemeal project. So I think it's a revolutionary idea in India's thought of thinking of laying out infrastructure. And India needs monumental change as opposed to incremental change which it has experienced over the past many decades. And Prime Minister Modi is heralding that monumental change initiative through Gati Shakti.
So, monumental changes within specific deadlines. Talking about your ministry, sir, the plan is to double the aviation footprint, increase the number of airports, heliports, water aerodromes to 220 by 2025. How do you plan to execute these projects, monitor them, given these specific timelines?
So, if you look at what we have been able to achieve, let me give you a data point. In the last 70 years, India had built 74 airports. In the last 7 years, we have built 62 airports at last count, because I'm now counting Kushinagar, which is the last airport that we inaugurated, the Prime Minister inaugurated, and provided connectivity to as well in the last 7 years. So we have almost doubled the number of airports in our country in 7 years. So what India achieved over 70 years, India has now achieved, close to achieved, in a matter of a span of 7 years. So we are today at close to about 136 airports. My imperative is the following. I do not think that infrastructure development in the area of civil aviation must be piecemeal. It must be holistic. And therefore, my effort is not only to provide the infrastructure in the form of an airport, but also to be able to provide the connectivity, because otherwise this infrastructure will become a white elephant. So let me give you two cases in point. We inaugurated the Sindhudurg airport about a month ago, and I was very clear from the very beginning, from the day I took over, that I will not inaugurate Sindhudurg airport unless I have a connectivity in terms of flight going there. And so we've got a Mumbai Sindhudurg connectivity through Alliance Air going to Sindhudurg. So there is an airport infrastructure that's been inaugurated, and along with that, a flight. Therefore, the dividends of which, the advantages of which, will percolate down to the grassroots. Similar is the case in Kushinagar. When we inaugurated the Kushinagar airport, we also provided connectivity from Delhi to Kushinagar, starting on the 26th of November. And on the 18th of December, we will be providing connectivity from Mumbai to Kushinagar and from Kolkata to Kushinagar. So an hitherto unserved airport, unconnected airport, is suddenly now connected to the political capital of the country, the financial capital of the country, and Kolkata, which is a prominent city close to that part of eastern UP. Now, our future plans. We plan to have in place by 2025 an additional close to about another 51 airports. And in addition to airports, let me tell you, Kriti, we also want to put in place heliports. We also want to put in place waterdromes, because for me, as a ministry, it is important to have last mile connectivity. You have international wide-bodied aircrafts coming into India. You have narrow-bodied aircraft which ferry passengers from our state capitals or our centers of 6-7 major metros down into the hinterland. But then you must have connectivity from the hinterland right down to the taluka and the district levels, which is provided by smaller aircrafts as well as helicopters. And helicopters also is a huge area in India which is completely unexploited, for which I put a heli policy in place. So any change or targets that need to be met have to be also met through pillars of policy change. So number one is the target that you set out in your question itself. From 74, we have gone to 136 in 7 years, and from 136, we propose to go to 220 over the next 4 to 5 years, which is going to be an exponential growth in airport infrastructure in India. Similarly, we also want to improve connectivity, and through the UDAN program, we are planning to have in place 1,000 routes, new routes, by 2025. We have already connected close to 389 routes as on date. In that program, we plan to build 100 airports. We've already built 60 airports as on date, another 40 airports going forward. So we have very ambitious plans, because I believe that the forestay of travel in the years to come is going to rapidly move from road and rail toward air. And just to end, let me give you the data point that I'm looking at. Today, you have 187 million people traveling by rail on second class AC or above. You have 144 million people traveling by air. The delta between the two is roughly 40 million. However, rail is experiencing a compounded annual growth rate of only close to 5.6%. Civil aviation is going to experience a CAGR of close to 10.3%. So the day is not far, 3 or 4 years down the road, where civil aviation total traffic will overtake second class AC and above traffic on rail. And if you look at in terms of penetration of the market, we have close to about 1.3 billion people in this country, 130 crores. But today, you have 144 million round trip travels. Discrete travelers are only close to about 2% of our population. And therefore, the capability and the potential is huge. And no pun intended, but let me end by saying the sky is the limit.
And probably that has already started with Hawai Chappal to Hawai Yatra.
Correct.
But anyway, sir, talking about Gati Shakti, it is difficult to actually assess the scale of sheer development. But talking about the current plans for your ministry, what kind of investment do you foresee?
Well, we are looking at a national infrastructure pipeline investment profile of close to about 90,000 crores by 2025, which means we've got a very ambitious pipeline of close to about 18,000 crores per annum over the next 4 to 5 years. And the divide within that 18,000 crores is close to about 30% with government and about 70% with the private sector. So we have close to about 15 new airports coming up on a PPP model as we speak. The prominent among those are the Navi Mumbai Airport, Jewar Airport, Mopa Airport in Goa, and another 10 or 12 that are being rolled out as we speak. I really believe that the potential for civil aviation is now going to come not from the mature metro airports alone. So whether it's Delhi going from the current 70 million passengers to 100 million passengers, or the current Bombay going from close to about 45, 50 million passengers, capacity being augmented to close to about 70, 75 million, and a new airport being built, but it's also going to come from the hinterland. So let me give you a couple of examples. Hitherto unserved airports or unconnected airports like Jharsuguda in Orissa, Darbhanga, for example, or Rupsi in Assam. Today, you have traffic of close to about 1.5 to 2 lakh passengers per month coming from these airports, which were not connected at all. And so there is a transportation revolution slowly taking place in our country. As you see the economic model of civil aviation change, the civil aviation sector used to be looked at as a very elitist form of travel. Today, where you're going from a low volume, high margin, earlier model in civil aviation to a high volume, low margin, ticket fares are falling exponentially, allowing the common man to travel, and therefore PM's, the Prime Minister's commitment that Hawai Chappal wale bhi Hawai jahaz se safar kare, Udan standing for Ude Desh ka Aam Nagrik. You're seeing a tremendous fillip coming to civil aviation from travel from interstate as well as intrastate, which is a new model that's being developed within India.
So that's a very ambitious plan. And last point on Gati Shakti before we talk about your ministry. States would be of paramount importance, particularly
Correct.
for your ministry.
Correct.
Do you think that kind of coordinated approach, an umbrella approach, that holistic approach, that could be a challenging task?
Well, I think in life, life is not worth living if you are not faced with challenges. But let me say this, that in the last 4 months that I have been carrying out the responsibility that has been given to me by the Prime Minister, I have had a wonderful experience in terms of my conversations with state chief ministers, trying to work with them, because at the end of the day, we are not on opposite ends of the table. We are both on the same side of the table. And therefore, I have made it my imperative to reach out to every chief minister with regard to not only airport infrastructure, air connectivity, but also in terms of making this sector more robust. And I think what I outlined, that we are working together towards that imperative and that goal. And therefore, even with our stakeholders, be it airlines, be it airport operators, be it MRO service companies, be it flying training organizations, be it cargo handlers, be it ground handlers, the whole ecosystem is one which is primed to ensure that state GDP rises and the national GDP rises. And therefore, government's role, at least in this sector, is moving away from being an RR to a CC. And therefore, let me clarify what I mean by that. Moving away from being a restrictive regulator to a constructive a coordinator or a facilitator. And I think in that effort, I must thank all the state governments as well. We have been working together in a very coordinated effort. I have had multiple conversations with almost 12 to 14 chief ministers to date. I have written to almost 29. That process of video conferencing is on as we speak, looking at every single detailed airport, the issues that need to be identified, what needs to be done, air connectivity, as well as the initiative that I've taken under my wing with regard to lowering VAT on ATF. And with that regard, I think I must, through you, thank the governments of and the union territories of Andaman and Nicobar, of J&K, of Ladakh, the state governments of Uttarakhand, the state governments of Haryana, who have taken a huge step in lowering VAT on ATF in their states from prohibitive almost 25 to 30% down to 1 to 2%. And the dividends of that are already being experienced by state governments. More airlines are flying to those states. More aircrafts are being refueled in those states. And therefore, the economic Laffer curve argument of lowering tax rates resulting in buoyancy of revenues is also being experienced by these states. And in a conclusion, let me just say this, that the civil aviation sector is a sector that carries with it not only connectivity between peoples within states, across the globe, but also carries along with it huge economic dividends in terms of economic growth. When you provide connectivity, it brings along with it economic investment. It brings along with it revenue growth for states through tourism. And therefore, this will be a huge fillip to multiple state governments in increasing state GDP as well. And therefore, it's been a very constructive dialogue and something that I have much appreciated. And I must thank all state governments for coordinating and working with us to ensure that we have the state goal as well as the national goal in mind as we progress forward.
But sir, we are living in this unprecedented era because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The financial losses of airlines globally touched a staggering high of $370 billion. In India alone, we incurred losses to the tune of $2.9 billion. Now, the cases are again rising globally. Recently, we saw the highest post-pandemic domestic traffic. How much does that worry you?
Well, I think we need to be alert constantly. This certainly is a pandemic, but beyond being a pandemic, it is a virus that even if there is a crack in the door that is open, it just slips in and creates mayhem and havoc to everything around it. And therefore, we need to be extremely vigilant. Where on the one hand, we are trying to ensure that we nurse the sector back to health in India. On the other hand, we need to be extremely vigilant every step of the way, every minute of the day. And therefore, this ministry, along with the health ministry, is looking at this sector with a very hands-on approach, with a daily monitoring approach, to be able to ensure that as we bring normalcy back, for example, 100% capacity is on stream today, starting the 18th of October. At the same time, we are looking at increasing flight connectivity on the international route to allow much more tourism and business travelers to come in. But that too must be monitored, must be engaged. And I do think the fact that the Prime Minister's imperative and the achievement of our government of 100 crore vaccines is a landmark achievement, not nationally, it's a landmark achievement globally. And that has only been possible because of the foresight, the dedication and commitment of the Prime Minister himself on this issue. I think that we need to be vigilant, safe, but at the same time, we need to start opening up as well. So it's going to be a very calibrated approach, but a calibrated approach that ensures that we bring normalcy back as soon as possible. And that responsibility is not incumbent on the Ministry of Civil Aviation alone, or the Ministry of Health alone, or the Government of India alone. It's also incumbent upon you and I and our viewers as citizens of this country. So we need to be safe. As Prime Minister said, "Do gaz ki duri, mask hai zaruri." As he has said, "Jaan hai to jahan hai." So we need to be responsible citizens in our country. And if we are able to follow that principle, I'm sure that India will remain secure as it has for the last couple of months, and we will go back to the economic growth of double digits, which we are nearing as we go by in the next couple of months.
So there's another important calibrated approach of the government privatization of Air India finally seeing the light of day when you're helping the ministry. What would it mean for our country, and if I may ask, for globally for the aviation sector?
Well, I think it brings about a paradigm shift and a huge inflection point. Air India has been our national carrier, has been our flagship carrier, and more than anything else, Air India is more than a product, it's a feeling. It's something that you cannot tangibly put words to describe. It's something जो हिंदी में कहते हैं ना कि हमारी ज़हन में है, right? And therefore, I believe that through this step that Government of India has taken, it's a historic step which will bring about a huge paradigm change in the service capabilities in the civil aviation sector. I do wish the new owners the best of luck. I do believe that it will bring about a new value proposition, a new service proposition, and I also believe that it'll herald a new change of service SLA, service level capabilities in the sector. From the government's point of view, it was an important step. It was extremely important for us from a fiscal standpoint as well. We still had close to about 50,000 crores, 46,000 crores to be exact, of debt on the balance sheet. Close to about 62,000 crores if you take all the current liabilities in place as well. We have funded Air India losses of almost about 7,500 crores over the last 5 years, which adds up to another 35,000 crores. So you're talking about 100,000 crore bill right there. Keep in mind as well that over the last 15 years, the Government of India has also invested close to about 50,000 crores of equity into Air India, as well as given government guarantees of another 50,000 crores. So if you add both those numbers together, you're looking at almost 200,000 crores. And it is the responsibility of Government of India to make sure that every rupee that we spend brings about dividends in terms of economic growth or social upliftment for our people across the length and breadth of our country. And therefore, this divestment is not only going to herald a new sun in the civil aviation sector, but it's also going to close the chapter on a long dusk of fiscal resources that were being withered away by Government of India, and those resources now will be channeled towards much more productive uses where you will see social returns coming from those resources as well.
Sir, you also recently unveiled Krishi Udan 2.0. The aim is, of course, doubling the farmers' income. The ministry will set up hub and spoke model. Help us understand the concept.
So here again, Kriti, let me elaborate. Is another example to you of the Prime Minister's directive of the whole of government approach. Krishi Udan version 1.0, which was part of the budget, was a pioneering move. Today in India, we have close to about 118 to 120 million metric tons of milk that we produce. We're the largest milk producers in the world. We have close to about 200 million tons of fruits and vegetables that we produce. We're the second largest fruit and vegetable producer in the world. We have close to about 300 million metric tons of food grains that we produce. We are the third largest food grain producer in the world. That's the asset side of your balance sheet. On the processing side, only close to about 40% of this is processed. The amount of wastage is huge, close to about $14 billion per annum. And so look at that potential that needs to be harnessed. That is the potential that Krishi Udan aims to harness through Krishi Udan 2.0. What we have done, which is different from Krishi Udan 1.0, is that we have brought in the Gati Shakti approach, where we have looked at a whole of government approach. There are 8 line ministries that have come together to make Krishi Udan 2.0 possible. And so the incentives that are being given are not only by Ministry of Civil Aviation. There is Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. There is Department of the Northeast. There is Ministry of Tribal Affairs. There is Ministry of Food Processing. There is Ministry of Fisheries, and 2 or 3 other line ministries that have come together to put this project together. And so many of their existing schemes, incentives from those are being given for Krishi Udan. And therefore, if you have potatoes from Lahaul or Spiti, or if you have lychees from Dehradun, or if you have pisciculture from South India, from Kerala, to be able to transport that, anything that is perishable, to be able to transport that to the market within a span of couple of hours, that will give the maximum margin to our farmers. That is the imperative of Krishi Udan. And what we have done at our level is that earlier we used to have quotas that the belly of the aircraft must have at least 50% of agricultural produce to avail of incentives. Now we have scrapped all landing, parking, RNFC, TNLC charges, irrespective of the percentage that the belly of the aircraft is carrying in terms of horticultural produce. We have increased the gamut of what we define as horticulture into poultry, into fisheries, into other products. So therefore, it's an all-encompassing program which includes 8 line ministries. And I do hope that with this, you will see a huge impetus in air cargo freight, which today is at close to about 3.3 million metric tons, growing at close to about 8 to 10% CAGR over the next couple of years.
Mr. Scindia, before we end this conversation, government plans to make drone an industry of around $18 to $20 billion by 2030. When will this traffic buster technology dominate our skies?
It already started. So the first is the policy. The second is the applicability and the demand. And the demand being driven by government clearly, whether it's application through vaccines, delivery of vaccines, the Swamitwa scheme in terms of land mapping. So government is part of that initiative of taking this forward. And the third is the incentivization, which is through the PLI scheme. So all 3 legs of this chair have been put in place for takeoff to happen of the drone sector, which I certainly believe under the Prime Minister's pursuance, commitment and dedication will happen in India.
Point well taken. On that note, thank you so much for talking to us and all the very best for your endeavors.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you on this program.